At the moment, I'm attending the Computational Neuroscience Academy, the Neuromatch Academy, and a few of the students there DM'd me asking me about any write-ups I had about the electronic music that I composed last year that were brainwaves related. They wanted to know more details about it, and because I don't have a very detailed oriented write-ups yet, I thought of doing this video for the students. I hope that I'm able to answer some of your questions at least, but I'll also try to do some write-ups on my blog post later on. And if you are interested and want to know more about it, I'd be more than happy to share more. Just comment your questions and we'll go from there. So my thesis was about establishing brainwaves during the information search process model. Information search process model in the information science field is one of the most cited theoretical framework developed by Dr. Carol Kuthauer, who did over 2 decades, I believe, of research and was able to come up with a defined process when a person, a human, goes through information search. So for example, let's say that there's a moment that you want to learn something, you have a question. From that moment until the moment that you actually find the answer to your question or find the knowledge that you're seeking, there's a process. And she developed a 6-phase process model called the ISB model. So my thesis was essentially based upon the information search process model. It included 6 phases. And the 6 phases, each of them included the physical activity of the participant, the mental and the emotional activity. This is the 3 components that the ISB model includes today. What I added with my thesis was the neurological aspect of it. In other words, more specifically, the brainwaves activity. So I did not look at what the physical brain did, for example, dopamine level and etc., but I did look at the EEG data. So I was able to establish, at least with my study, the EEG data, what bands were the most active during this search process model, which included 6 phases. And also, I had a total of 48 participants, human participants. I also had 3 different conditions in terms of emotion. I wanted to know whether emotions really mattered in terms of manipulation of the brain waves. So I manipulated the emotions. One condition was neutral, one condition was pleasant, one condition was unpleasant, all of which was manipulated visually through pictures. It all went through ethics approval, by the way, from the university, so there is no ethical issues there. And so looking at those 48 participants, I was able to map and I created a series of heat maps in terms of what the participants' brain waves did, where it lit up, and what bands were the most activated during each phase. I only focused on 3. I specifically look at the 3 phases in her model where the participants or the human being is most active to take an action towards seeking information. The phases before and after that were a little bit more about sort of preparation in their mindset. So those are the ones that you could actually practically look at in the lab. So I was able to create heat maps for those 3 phases, as well as looking at them whether they differed. And I was able to also show that there were a difference, whether the participants felt positive or negative prior to looking for that information. So very interestingly, I was able to really look at a pattern of EEG data that was very clear during these phases and mapping them for that specific phase. Okay, now let's look at how I connected that into the idea into composing music. One thing that I noticed was that right before the anticipation of the participant to find information, the emotions and the state of being and the brain waves of the participant went from somewhat negative to somewhat positive. This is again before me even manipulating their emotions. And there were very interestingly specific state of being, specific emotion, and specific brain waves that I looked at, that in the ISP model as well as in what I did showed clear indication that a person sort of had a specific state of being that was very hopeful and positive, etc. Knowing that anything that we see here or anything that we perceive from our sensory motor system affects the brain in one way or another, I thought to myself, what if there is a specific type of music tones or composition of a music that is able to sort of gear the brain waves and the state of being of a person towards that specific type of emotion, state of being, brain waves. And that is how it started, because then I started looking at some electronic music and I started composing it a little bit, and I was able to also see that they actually did make a change in the brain waves of the participants. And so I started playing around with some sounds and some music composition to see how / if that changed the brain waves to that specific brain waves composition that I had found in the lab during the information search model of the participants, if that makes sense. And I initially started working with the artificial intelligence music composition software. I played around with it for a few months and I did not like the result at all. And so I decided to compose it myself, and I chose electronic music only because words have a lot of weight to them in terms of different meaning for participants, whereas music tones don't. So I chose only to, and so the more I played around with it, the more I was able to, after a while, kind of have a hunch as to what those composition translated into brainwaves. Because every time I composed something, I tested it on humans. I started testing it with myself, with the EEG neural headset that I had, and then I also tested it with other people. Again, nothing scientific in terms of having peer-reviewed journal about it, but I would ask people, I would ask whoever wanted to volunteer to test them. And so I went from composing a piece of music and then testing it on human subjects with just the neural headset on them. And then I would see whether most of the time their EEG showed to be on that specific band that I wanted it. To give you an example, one of these soundtrack is called Purpose. And the reason I called it Purpose is because these are the brain waves that I detected right before the participants were about to find the knowledge and the information that they were looking for. So it was an anticipation of hope and positive feeling that they had. And those specific brain waves were clear in the heat maps that I did. So were they in the information search process model. So the whole track, for example, of Purpose obviously is not designed to put the participant in that specific brain waves, but the majority of it will. And so if you're one of those researchers and who actually have a neural headset, I'd be very curious if you want to test it on yourself or on somebody else as well. I also want to mention that there are a lot of scientists and musicians in the space who are doing brilliant work. Most of the studies that I have read, they start with the frequency of the music. I have never seen those who actually create and compose the music, and then test the frequency of the human brain. And so that is the difference. So I started with composing music, tested it back and forth, and then tested it on human brain, and determined which frequency their brains were eliciting most of the time during the track. Obviously, you can't do every single part of the track, but most of the track, what was the heat map of the brain frequencies that a person elicited while listening to the track. And the reason I did that was because I wanted to see what happens in the brain while they're listening to a specific soundtrack. What are the brain frequencies? Was I able to compose specific music track to put the human brain frequency most of the time on that level? Because when you collect data, when you observe human brain frequency, essentially the brain frequencies is only up to 100 hertz. But a lot of these music that I've been told about and I kind of bump into from here and there, their frequencies are at the music tones level. So I really don't know how they measured it, or if they even measured it on human brain frequency level. So that is the difference. I hope this makes sense, and I hope I was detailed enough. At least I tried to be detailed enough to just do it on a video and trying to keep the video short. But in a nutshell, if you think about in summary, is that the music composition, electronic music composition, was designed to put the brain frequency of a human to such a level and to parts of the brain region that was detected during the information knowledge seeking process model, most of which include positive frequencies, such as anticipation of finding an information, or being excited about finding an information that we're looking for, or any positive feeling that it's connected to us knowing and receiving information, receiving knowledge, receiving data, knowing data, figuring out something. All that is part of the information search process, because if you think about it, everything we work with is data, everything we work with is knowledge / information. And so this framework, to me, it's extremely important in our everyday life, because all of us at the end of the day are working with information, knowledge, and we want to know. Basically, that's we want to know. So I was interested in the brain waves of knowing. What was the brain waves of knowing? And then I composed those music to put it in the brain waves of knowing. What are the brain frequencies of knowing in a human being? What are the brain frequencies of knowledge? The moment that we read or hear or receive a knowledge, there are specific brain frequencies that correlate to that. And this music research, these soundtrack frequencies, and because the brain frequencies of a human being mostly is very positive, hopeful, and purposeful, then the idea with these composition of these brain music soundtrack was to change and alter that brain frequencies towards those positive and emotional positive state of being. I'm not claiming that this research and this work is completed. If you're a scientist, I'm sure you've noticed that there is a lot of assumptions in there. But because this was a side project, I started working on it because the idea came, and I just started working on it right away. And Got a lot of great feedback from people who listened to it or people who actually helped me measuring their brain waves. And so definitely there's a lot of work to be done. So if you're a scientist, I'm sure you've noticed that there's a lot of assumptions. So this is not a complete work. So definitely let me know if you have any questions or comments. Just comment below and I'll try to answer, or hit the like button if you liked it. Thanks again. I'll see you next time. Bye.